The world stopped spinning the night I saw my stepfather cry. His broad shoulders, usually so steady, shook like a leaf caught in a storm, and his hands gripped the edge of the kitchen table as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling apart. I was 16, standing frozen in the doorway of our small Ohio farmhouse, watching a man I'd known as unbreakable unravel before my eyes. It was late, the kind of late where the world feels too quiet, like it's holding its breath. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and the only light came from a single bulb above the stove, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. My stepfather, Tom, sat alone, his face buried in his hands, unaware of me watching. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water, but what I found was a truth I wasn't ready for, a truth that would change everything. Tom wasn't my real dad. My mom married him when I was 10, after my biological father walked out without a backward glance. Tom was different, kind, patient, with a laugh that filled every corner of our creaky old house. He taught me how to fix a flat tire, how to bait a fishing hook, how to stand up to bullies without throwing a punch. But that night, I saw a side of him I didn't know existed. A side he'd kept hidden, locked away like a secret he was afraid to let breathe. I stepped forward, my bare feet cold against the floor, and whispered, "Tom, you okay?" My voice sounded small, like it didn't belong in the weight of that moment. He looked up, his blue eyes red-rimmed and glistening, and for a second, I thought he might brush me off, tell me to go back to bed. Instead, he wiped his face with the back of his hand and said, "Sit down, Ethan. There's something I need to tell you." I pulled out a chair, my heart pounding. The air felt heavy, like it was carrying the weight of whatever he was about to say. Tom took a deep breath, his fingers tracing the grain of the wooden table, and then he spoke words that hit me like a freight train. "I'm gay, Ethan. I've always been gay." The room spun. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process it. Tom, the man who'd been my rock for 6 years, who'd married my mom and built a life with us, was telling me something that felt like it belonged to someone else's story. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. All I could do was stare at him, trying to reconcile the man I knew with the truth he was laying bare. "I never meant to lie to you," he continued, his voice steady but raw. "When I met your mom, I was running from myself. I thought I could be someone else, someone who could fit into this life, this family. But I can't keep pretending. Not anymore. I wanted to ask a million questions. Why now? Why tell me? What about Mom? But my throat was tight, and all I could manage was, does she know? Tom nodded, his jaw tight. She's known for a while. We've been trying to figure out how to make this work, but it's complicated. He looked down, his fingers still tracing the table's edge. I love her, Ethan. I love you both. But I'm not being honest with myself, and that's not fair to any of us. The words hung between us, heavy and sharp. I didn't know what to feel, anger, confusion, betrayal, or something else entirely. I'd grown up in a small town where people whispered about those kinds of people, where being different wasn't just frowned upon. It was dangerous. And now, the man I looked up to most was telling me he was one of them. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tom leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Because you deserve to know who I am, Ethan, the real me. And because I trust you to understand, even if it takes time." I didn't know if I could understand. Not then. But as I looked at him, at the vulnerability in his face, I realized something. Tom wasn't just my stepfather. He was a man carrying a weight I couldn't even begin to fathom. And in that moment, I knew this conversation was only the beginning. The next morning, the house felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mom was quiet at breakfast, her eyes darting between me and Tom, searching for something, maybe reassurance, maybe forgiveness. I didn't know what to say to her either. All I could think about was Tom's words, replaying in my head like a song I couldn't shake. School was a blur. I sat through algebra and history, my mind miles away, wrestling with what I'd learned. I thought about the kids at school, the ones who threw around slurs like they were nothing, the ones who'd beat up anyone who didn't fit their idea of normal. I thought about Tom, who'd always been there for me, who'd never once let me down. How could he be the same man they'd hate? That afternoon, I found him in the garage, tinkering with an old motorcycle he'd been restoring for years. The radio played some classic rock song, and the smell of oil and metal filled the air. He looked up as I walked in, his expression cautious, like he was bracing for my judgment. "I don't get it," I said, leaning against the workbench. "If you've always known, why'd you marry Mom?" Tom set down his wrench, wiping his hands on a rag. "I thought I could make it work," he said. "I love you, Mom, still do in my own way. I thought I could bury that part of me, live the life everyone expected. But you can't outrun who you are, Ethan. Not forever." I nodded, even though I didn't fully understand. "Are you leaving us?" The question burned as it left my mouth. Tom's face softened. "No, I'm not going anywhere unless you and your mom want me to. But I need to be honest with her and with myself. And I need you to know that being who I am doesn't change how much I care about you." I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, watching him work on the motorcycle. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was honest. And for the first time, I realized that Tom wasn't just giving me his truth. He was giving me a chance to see him, really see him, for the first time. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I thought about love, about what it meant to hide who you are, about the courage it took to admit it. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. Tom was still the man who'd taught me how to be strong, how to be kind. And no truth, no matter how unexpected, could change that. The weeks that followed were like walking on eggshells. Mom and Tom tried to keep things normal, but the air in our house was thick with unspoken questions. I caught Mom staring out the kitchen window sometimes, her coffee going cold, her face unreadable. Tom threw himself into his work at the hardware store and the motorcycle in the garage, like staying busy could keep the tension at bay. I didn't know how to talk to either of them about it, so I didn't. Instead, I carried Tom's secret like a stone in my pocket, heavy and impossible to ignore. At school, things got worse. Word spreads fast in a small town, and somehow, whispers about Tom started circling. I don't know how it got out. Maybe someone overheard him at the bar. Maybe Mom confided in the wrong friend. But by mid-October, kids at school were looking at me differently, their smirks sharp as knives. "Heard about your stepdad," Jake Carter said one day in the cafeteria, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. "He's one of those, huh?" I wanted to punch him, to scream that he didn't know anything, but I just grabbed my tray and walked away. The truth was I didn't know how to defend Tom. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was still figuring out what it all meant. I'd grown up hearing the same slurs, the same jokes, and now they were aimed at someone I loved. It felt like the ground was shifting beneath me, and I didn't know where to stand. One Friday night, Tom knocked on my bedroom door. I was sprawled on my bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to drown out the noise in my head. "You up for a drive?" he asked, his voice light, but laced with something serious. I nodded, grabbing my jacket, curious despite myself. We climbed into his old pickup truck, the one that smelled like leather and motor oil, and drove out of town, the headlights cutting through the dark. The radio played softly, some old Springsteen song about running and never looking back. Tom didn't say much at first, just kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. Finally, he pulled off onto a dirt road that led to a lake, the water shimmering under the moonlight. He cut the engine, and we sat there, the silence stretching between us. "I used to come here when I was your age," he said finally, "when things got too heavy at home. My dad, he wasn't an easy man. Didn't take kindly to me being different." I turned to look at him, surprised. Tom never talked about his past, not like this. "What do you mean, different?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. He gave me a small, sad smile. "I knew I was gay when I was 12. Try to hide it, try to be the son my dad wanted. But you can't hide who you are forever, Ethan. It eats you alive." I stared out at the lake, the water so still it looked like glass. "What did you do?" I asked. "I left," he said simply. "Moved to the city, tried to find myself. Met people who showed me it was okay to be who I am. But then I met your mom, and I thought maybe I could have both. The life I wanted and the life everyone else expected. He shook his head. I was wrong. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened as he told me about his life before us, about the friends he'd lost, the family who'd turned their backs, the years he'd spent trying to be someone he wasn't. His voice was steady, but there was a pain in it that cut deep. I realized then that Tom wasn't just my stepfather. He was a man who'd been fighting a battle I couldn't even imagine. "Why'd you come back?" I asked. "To a place like this, where they don't get it." He looked at me, his eyes soft but fierce. "Because of you and your mom. You're my family, Ethan. And family's worth fighting for, even when it's hard." We sat there for a long time, watching the stars reflect on the lake. I thought about what he'd said, about family, about fighting for what matters. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing. Tom was still the same man who'd taught me how to be strong, how to be kind. And no matter what anyone else said, that wasn't going to change. When we got home, Mom was waiting up, her face tight with worry. She looked at Tom, then at me, and I saw something pass between them, something unspoken but real. I went to bed that night with a new weight in my chest, not of confusion, but of determination. I didn't know how to fix things, but I knew I wanted to try. By November, the whispers at school had turned into shouts. Someone spray-painted a slur on our mailbox, the red letters glaring against the chipped white paint. I saw it on my way to the bus, and my stomach dropped. I wanted to scrub it off before Tom or Mom saw, but they were already outside, staring at it like it was a wound. Mom's face was pale, her lips pressed tight, but Tom just grabbed a can of paint from the garage and started covering it up, his movements calm but deliberate. "People are idiots," he said when he caught me watching. "Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. It got to me when I heard kids snickering in the hallways, when I saw Mom crying in the laundry room, when I caught Tom staring out the window like he was looking for a way out. I wanted to scream at the world, to make them see Tom the way I did, a man who'd chosen us, who'd stayed even when it hurt. But I was just a kid, and the world felt bigger than me. One day after school, I found a note slipped into my locker. It was unsigned, scrawled in messy handwriting. "Your stepdad's a freak. You're next." I crumpled it up, my hands shaking, and threw it in the trash. But the words stuck like poison seeping into my skin. I didn't tell Tom or Mom. I didn't want to add to their pain. But I started skipping school, faking headaches to stay home, afraid of what else might be waiting for me. Tom noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed when something was off. One evening, he found me in the backyard, tossing rocks into the creek behind our house. "You've been quiet lately," he said, sitting on the grass next to me. "What's going on?" I wanted to lie, to say it was nothing, but the words spilled out before I could stop them. I told him about the note, about the looks, about the anger I felt every time someone said something about him. I told him I was scared, not of him, but of what it meant to care about him in a town like ours. Tom listened, his face calm, but his eyes intense. When I finished, he picked up a rock and tossed it into the creek, watching the ripples spread. "You know why I told you the truth, Ethan?" he said. "Not just because you deserve it, but because I want you to know it's okay to be who you are, no matter what anyone says. The world's going to try to tear you down, but you don't have to let it." I looked at him, at the lines etched into his face, the strength in his shoulders despite everything. "How do you do it?" I asked. "How do you keep going when people hate you for something you can't change?" He smiled, but it was a sad kind of smile. "You find people worth fighting for, and you hold on to them, no matter what." That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I wasn't going to let the whispers win. The next day at school, when Jake Carter started in on me again, I didn't walk away. I looked him in the eye and said, "My stepdad's a better man than you'll ever be." The words felt like fire, but they also felt like freedom. Jake laughed, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. I didn't care. For the first time, I felt like I was standing up for something bigger than myself. I was standing up for Tom, for Mom, for the family we'd built despite everything. When I got home, Tom was in the kitchen, making dinner. He looked up as I walked in, and I could tell he knew something had changed. "You okay, kid?" he asked. I nodded, a lump in my throat. "Yeah, I think I am." Winter came, and with it, a fragile kind of peace. The mailbox stayed clean, and the whispers at school quieted down, at least for a while. But the tension in our house didn't vanish. It just changed shape. Mom and Tom were trying. I could see that, but there were moments when I caught them looking at each other like strangers, like they were both trying to figure out who they were supposed to be now. One night, I overheard them talking in the living room, their voices low but sharp. "I can't keep living a lie, Sarah," Tom said. "But I don't want to lose you or Ethan." "You think I want to lose you?" Mom shot back, her voice breaking. I don't know how to do this." I wanted to barge in, to tell them to stop, to fix it, but I didn't. I stayed in the hallway, listening as they fell silent, the weight of their words settling like snow. I realized then that love wasn't just about holding on, it was about letting go, too, even when it hurt. The next morning, Tom found me in the garage, where I'd started helping him with the motorcycle. It had become our thing, a way to talk without really talking. "Your mom and I are working through some stuff," he said, handing me a wrench. "But no matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. You hear me?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I hear you." As the months passed, I started to see Tom differently, not just as my stepfather, but as a man who'd chosen to be honest, even when it cost him. I saw it in the way he carried himself, in the way he smiled despite the whispers, in the way he never stopped showing up for me and Mom. And I started to understand what he'd meant about fighting for what matters. One day in early spring, Tom came home with a man I'd never met before. His name was David, and he was tall, with kind eyes and a quiet laugh. Tom introduced him as a friend, but I saw the way they looked at each other, the way their hands brushed when they thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't jealousy I felt. It was something else, something like hope. David started coming around more, joining us for dinners, helping with the motorcycle, even teaching me how to play poker. He was different from Tom, softer, more open, but he had the same kind of strength, the kind that came from knowing who you are and owning it. I watched them together, and for the first time, I saw Tom truly happy, not just the version of him he'd shown the world. One night, after David left, I found Tom on the porch, staring at the stars. "You love him, don't you?" I asked, sitting next to him. Tom didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Yeah," he said finally. "I do." I nodded, the words settling in my chest. "Good," I said. "You deserve that." Tom's eyes glistened, and he reached over, squeezing my shoulder. "You're a good kid, Ethan. Better than I deserve." I didn't know if that was true, but I knew one thing. Tom had given me something I'd carry forever, a lesson in courage, in love, in what it means to be true to yourself, no matter the cost. By summer, our family looked different, but it was still ours. Mom and Tom decided to separate, not out of anger, but out of a kind of love that I was only starting to understand. They sat me down one evening, their hands clasped together on the couch, and explained that they'd always be family, just in a new way. Mom was moving to an apartment in town, and Tom was staying in the house with me, at least until I finished high school. David was a constant now, not just a visitor, and I was starting to see him as part of our patchwork family, too. The night that changed everything came in July during a county fair. The air smelled of popcorn and cotton candy, and the lights from the Ferris wheel lit up the sky. Tom and David were there, walking side by side, not hiding the way they held hands. I saw people stare, some with curiosity, some with disgust, but Tom didn't flinch. He just kept walking, his head high, David's hand in his. We stopped at the lake on the way home, the same one Tom had taken me to months before. The three of us sat on the shore, skipping rocks, laughing about nothing and everything. And then Tom turned to me, his voice quiet but steady. "Ethan, I want you to remember this night. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. This is who I am, who we are, and I'm not ashamed of it." I looked at him, at David, at the lake reflecting the stars, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just about Tom or David or even me. It was about the kind of world I wanted to live in, one where people could love who they loved without fear, without shame. I realized then that Tom hadn't just given me a memory. He'd given me a mission. "I won't forget," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I promise." Years later, when I was in college, I'd think back to that night. Tom's hand in David's, the stars above us, the weight of a truth that set us all free. I'd think about the courage it took for Tom to be himself, to show me that love is worth fighting for, no matter what it looks like. And I'd carry that lesson with me through every choice, every challenge, every moment I had to decide who I wanted to be. Tom and David got married a few years later, in a small ceremony by that same lake. I was their best man, standing beside them as they promised to love each other for the rest of their lives. Mom was there, too, smiling through tears, proud of the family we'd become. And as I watched them exchange rings, I knew that the most important memory of my life wasn't just that night by the lake. It was every moment Tom chose to be true, to fight for love, to show me what it means to be human.